Look at them. Just look at them on that screen. I'm sitting here in my kitchen in a house that Elias, the great philanthropist Elias Vance, bought me 10 years ago. It's a beautiful house, but it's a house built on silence. And right now on Channel 4, they are showing his funeral at the National Cathedral. There's his official wife, the widow Vance. Look at that black veil. Look at how she's dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief that probably costs more than my car. She's playing the part of the grieving queen, telling the reporters that Elias lived for family and integrity. Integrity? Elias Vance spent every Thursday for the last 7 years in this kitchen. He spent every Saturday morning at the park with a little boy named Marcus, who has his amber eyes and his stubborn chin. But you won't hear his name mentioned in that eulogy. You won't see Marcus in the front row. The reporters are saying his $4 billion estate is going entirely to his wife and his only socialite daughter. They're saying the Vance legacy is sealed. But I'm looking at the letter Elias left me in his safe deposit box, the one that says, "Elena, I was a coward in life, but I won't let them erase him in death." I wasn't going to go. I was going to let them have their little show. But then I saw the widow on the news this morning, laughing after the cameras supposedly cut away, talking about how she's cleansing the estate of all of Elias's mistakes. Marcus isn't a mistake. He's a Vance. Wait, before I put on this black dress, I need to know, have y'all ever been the secret in someone's life? Not because you did something wrong, but because they were too scared to be honest with the world? Drop your city in the comments. I'm in Chicago and I'm about to catch a flight to DC for a funeral I wasn't invited to. Widow Vance thinks she's burying her husband today. She doesn't realize she's actually opening a door she can never close again. Marcus, honey, get your coat. We have a church to go to. The wind in DC is biting today, but I don't feel the cold. I only feel the weight of Marcus's small hand in mine. We're standing at the iron gates of the National Cathedral. It's like a fortress. There are black SUVs lined up for blocks, and security guards with earpieces looking at everyone like they're a threat. I'm wearing a simple black dress, nothing designer, just something neat, and I've got Marcus in his little Sunday suit. As we approach the entrance, a guard steps out, his hand raised. "Invitation only, ma'am," he says. His eyes scan my face, then drop to Marcus. I see him pause for a split second when he looks at the boy, but then his face turns back to stone. This is a private service for the Vance family and their guests. I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Elias gave me. It wasn't a fancy, gold-trimmed card. It was a handwritten note on the company's private stationery, stamped with Elias's personal signet ring. "I am the Vance family," I said. My voice didn't shake, y'all. I don't know where that strength came from, but it felt like Elias was standing right behind me. The guard took the paper, read it, and I watched the color drain from his face. He looked at me, then at the boy again, and then he spoke into his lapel. "We have a situation at Gate 3. Permission to grant entry to a Mrs. Elena and guest." There was a long silence. Then the gate buzzed. "Go on in," he whispered, almost like he was warning me. "But be careful. The widow has her own security inside." I looked down at Marcus. He was looking at the gargoyles on the building, totally innocent. He doesn't know that inside those doors is a woman who spent the last decade making sure he didn't exist. He doesn't know that his father's official life is about to collide with his real one. Listen, the music inside is loud, but the silence that's about to hit when we walk down that aisle, that's going to be the loudest thing anyone has ever heard. Marcus, keep your head up, just like I taught you. I didn't wait for an usher. I knew where the family was supposed to be. As soon as we stepped onto that red carpet, the air in the cathedral seemed to freeze. You know that feeling when a room full of 2,000 people suddenly stops breathing at the same time? It sounded like a collective gasp that got caught in the rafters. Click, click, click. My heels were the only thing echoing against the stone. I kept my eyes fixed on the front, on that polished mahogany casket draped in white lilies. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the socialites leaning in, their pearls clinking as they whispered. "Who is that? Is that a Vance? Look at the boy." I didn't stop until I reached the second row, right behind the official family. I saw the back of the widow's head. She was sitting there, stiff as a statue, until she heard the whispers. She turned around just a fraction, and her eyes met mine. Y'all, if looks could kill, I'd be buried right next to Elias. Her eyes weren't full of grief. They were full of pure, unadulterated venom. She looked at my simple dress, she looked at my shoes, and then she looked at Marcus. And that's when it happened. Marcus stepped slightly into the light of the altar. He looked up at the large portrait of Elias sitting on an easel. He pointed his little finger and said loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear, "Look, Mommy, it's Daddy." The widow didn't cry, she didn't scream. She stood up, her silk veil fluttering, and she hissed at an usher, "Get this woman and this child out of my sight, now." I didn't move an inch. I just looked her dead in the eye and said, "Elias invited us, Diane, and unlike you, I never miss a date with my husband." The organ music hit a crescendo, but it couldn't drown out the sound of 1,000 people realizing the Vance legacy just got a lot more complicated. The ushers started moving towards us, but before they could lay a finger on me, the lead attorney for the estate stood up from the front row. He wasn't looking at the widow, he was looking at Marcus, and he looked like he'd just seen a miracle, or a disaster. The head usher reached for my arm, but Mr. Arrington, the man who had been Elias's lead counsel for 30 years, stepped into the aisle. He didn't just step, he blocked them. He held up one hand, and with the other, he adjusted his glasses, looking at Marcus like he was seeing Elias's ghost. "Stand down," Arrington said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of the law behind it. The widow was trembling now. She stepped out of her pew, her designer heels clicking frantically. "Arthur, what are you doing? This is a funeral. Throw this woman out. She's a delusional grifter trying to tarnish Elias's name." I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a second envelope, the one Arrington himself had couriered to my house 6 months ago, with instructions to only open at the service. I handed it to him. Arrington opened the seal, he scanned the page, and I watched his jaw set. He walked over to the lectern, the same one that where the vice president had just finished speaking, and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arrington announced, "before we proceed with the internment, there is a legal requirement I must fulfill. Mr. Vance left a sealed codicil to his will with explicit instructions that it be read at this exact moment, in the presence of his entire family." The widow let out a sound, half gasp, half sob. "Arthur, you don't dare!" Arrington ignored her. He began to read. "I, Elias Vance, being of sound mind, acknowledge that my public life has been a carefully constructed image, but the truth is, my heart and my legacy reside with my son, Marcus Elias Vance, born to Elena Thorne. To ensure his protection, I hereby vest 51% of the Vance Global voting shares into a trust managed by his mother, effective immediately upon my passing." The cathedral didn't just go quiet, it went dead. You could hear a pin drop on that marble. I looked at the widow. I saw the moment she realized she wasn't the owner of that mansion anymore. She wasn't the head of the foundation. She was a minority shareholder in a company run by the mistake she tried to hide. I leaned in, just close enough for only her to hear. You told the press this morning that you were cleansing the estate of Elias's mistakes, Diane. Well, it looks like the only thing being cleansed today is the boardroom. Arrington looked up from the paper. The service will continue, but the seating arrangements have changed. Mrs. Thorne, Marcus, please take your place in the front row. The walk to the gravesite felt like a march to a throne. We weren't in the back of the procession anymore. I was walking directly behind the casket, Marcus's small hand tucked firmly in mine. Behind us, I could hear the frantic whispering of the widow's lawyers and the click of her heels as she tried to keep up, her official family trailing like shadows. The cemetery was beautiful, the kind of place where even the grass looks like it costs a fortune. A green velvet canopy was set up over the open earth. As we arrived, the widow tried to push past me to take her seat in the center chair, the seat reserved for the primary mourner. I didn't shove her. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood in her way, a wall of mahogany and silk. "Diane," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "the chair belongs to the person who holds the legacy, and according to the paper Arthur just read, that's not you." She looked at me, her face vibrating with a rage she couldn't show the cameras. "You think a piece of paper makes you one of us? You're a footnote, Elena, a temporary distraction. I will spend every cent I have left to tie you up in court until that boy is a grown man." "You can try," I said, finally stepping aside to let Marcus sit in the center chair. "But while you're busy with your lawyers, I'll be busy with the board of directors. I've already called an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow. You might want to check if your keycard still works." The priest began the final rites. As he spoke about ashes to ashes, Marcus stood up. He walked to the edge of the grave, looked down at the mahogany box, and dropped his rose. "I love you, Daddy," he whispered. In that moment, the cameras, the ones the widow had invited to document her graceful mourning, weren't focused on her. They were zoomed in on the boy. They were capturing the birthmark. They were capturing the truth. As the service ended, the widow's daughter, a girl who had never even looked at me, walked up. She looked at Marcus, then at me. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is he really my brother?" I looked at her and, for the first time, I felt a flash of pity. She was a victim of the lies too. "He is, and unlike your mother, I'm not going to pretend you don't exist. But the house, the mansion, we're going there now. I suggest you tell your mother to start packing. She has until sunset." The Vance estate is a place people only see in movies. 10 bedrooms, a library with books older than this country, and a staff of 20 people who have been trained to look at the ground when a Vance walks by. When my car pulled up to the front circle, the widow's Mercedes was already there, parked crookedly. She had run inside to barricade herself in, thinking that if she stayed behind those stone walls, the reality of the funeral wouldn't follow her. I stepped out of the car, Marcus's hand in mine. As we walked up the marble steps, 2 of the widow's personal security guards tried to cross their arms in front of the door. "Mrs. Vance is not receiving visitors," one said, his voice tight. I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I simply turned to the man standing behind me, Mr. Arrington, the lawyer, who had followed us in his own car. He handed me a tablet. On the screen was a court-ordered injunction signed by a judge the moment the codicil was verified at the cathedral. "This property is owned by the Vance Global Trust, and the trustee is Mrs. Thorne. You are currently obstructing the legal owner. If you don't move in 10 seconds, the Metropolitan Police, who are currently at the bottom of the driveway, will assist you." The foyer was silent, except for the sound of someone sobbing upstairs. I walked to the center of the hall, under a chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of diamonds. "Lydia," I called out. The head housekeeper, a woman who had worked for Elias for 20 years, appeared from the shadows of the dining room. She looked at me, and her eyes fell on Marcus. She didn't look angry. She looked relieved. "Yes, Mrs. Thorne," I said. "Please take Marcus to the kitchen and get him some cocoa. And, Lydia, tell the staff they don't have to look at the floor anymore. There's a new management style in this house." I headed up the grand staircase. I didn't have to guess which room was the master suite. I could hear the sound of drawers slamming and glass breaking. I pushed the door open. Diane was there, her mourning veil tossed on the floor like trash. She was frantically stuffing designer dresses into a suitcase, her face streaked with mascara. "Get out!" she screamed, throwing a gold-plated clock at the door. It shattered against the frame. "This is my home. I spent 25 years building this life." "No, Diane," I said, walking into the room and picking up a framed photo of Elias that she had turned face down. "You spent 25 years building a cage. Elias just gave me the key to let everyone out. You have 2 hours. Pack what is yours, leave what belongs to the estate. And Diane, don't touch the safe. I've already changed the biometric codes. Elias's legacy isn't your retirement fund anymore. It's my son's future." 8 a.m. The top floor of Vance Global is usually a place of whispers and expensive cologne, but this morning it felt like an arena. The board of directors, 12 men and 2 women who had spent their lives protecting Elias's secrets, were seated around a glass table that cost more than my first house. At the head of the table sat the interim CEO, a man named Sterling, who had been the widow's right hand for a decade. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He was busy looking at a tablet, his face tight. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we appreciate you coming in, but this codicil is currently being challenged in 3 different courts. Until those are resolved, you have no standing in this room. Please leave before I call security." I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table, right behind him. I didn't need to shout. "Sterling," I said, "you're a smart man. You know that a challenge doesn't stop an execution. As of 6 a.m. this morning, the SEC has been notified of the transfer of voting shares. I don't need your permission to be here. I own the chair you're sitting in." I slid a folder across the table. It wasn't about the will. It was about the company. "I've spent the last 7 years being Elias's secret," I told the room. "But while he was with me, we didn't just talk about Marcus. We talked about you. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the consulting fees Sterling has been paying to his own brother's firm. And I know that this company is 6 months away from a federal audit that will put half of you in orange jumpsuits." The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. Sterling's hand started to shake. "Elias didn't leave me 51% because I was his favorite. He left it to me because I'm the only one who owes none of you anything. I'm the only one who can save this legacy from the rot you've let settle in." I looked at the youngest board member, a woman who had been trying to speak up for years. "Sarah, you have the floor. Tell the board about the budget discrepancies in the London office." By 10 a.m., Sterling was escorted out, not by my security, but by the board itself. They knew the wind had changed. I walked out of that room and called Lydia at the house. "Lydia, tell Marcus to pick out his favorite book. We're going to the library this afternoon. And tell the widow's daughter she's welcome to stay for lunch. We have a lot of family history to catch up on." By the time I got back from the office, the house felt different. The air didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. But the master suite, that was a war zone. Diane was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling vanity mirror, the one framed in gold leaf. She was wearing a coat that cost more than a teacher's salary, but she looked hollow. She was staring at her reflection like she didn't recognize the woman looking back. "The board called me," she said, her voice sounding like dry leaves. She didn't even turn around. "They said you're firing Sterling. They said you're opening the books." "I'm not just opening them, Diane. I'm giving them to the auditors," I said, standing in the doorway. I didn't enter the room. I didn't want the scent of her desperation on my clothes. "The Vance image you spent 20 years polishing was built on top of a sinkhole. I'm just letting the ground settle." She turned then. Her mascara was dry, but her eyes were red-shot. You think you've won? You're just the flavor of the month. Once the scandal breaks, once the world knows Elias was a liar who kept a second family in a shack on the south side, they'll tear you apart too. They'll call your son a bastard. They'll call you a gold digger. I walked toward her, slow and steady. I pulled out a small digital recorder, the one Elias had given me 3 years ago. I hit play. Elena, Diane knows. Elias's voice filled the room. It was tired, heavy with regret. She's known about Marcus since he was 3 months old. She took $5 million from the foundation to keep it quiet. She didn't protect my legacy, Elena. She held it for ransom. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than the funeral. The world isn't going to tear me apart, Diane, I said softly, because I'm not the one who took the bribe. You weren't a grieving wife. You were a business partner who got out-negotiated. And as for my son, he's the only thing in this house that isn't a lie. I watched her walk down that grand staircase for the last time. She didn't look back at the art or the marble. She just looked at the exit. I walked over to the vanity and picked up the gold-plated clock she had thrown earlier. It was still broken. I didn't fix it. I just put it in the trash. The time for Diane's version of the Vance family was officially over. It was time to see what Marcus wanted for dinner. The lawyers were gone. The board was silenced. The widow's car had finally disappeared down the long, winding driveway. For the first time in 48 hours, the house was quiet. But it wasn't that cold, empty silence I'd felt when I first walked in. It felt like the building was finally taking a breath. I found Marcus in the library. He wasn't playing with the $50,000 chess set or looking at the rare artifacts Elias had collected. He was sitting on the floor in a patch of moonlight, looking at a small, battered photo album I'd brought from home. It didn't have pictures of galas or ribbon cuttings. It had pictures of Elias in a hoodie, flipping burgers at our kitchen table. Pictures of him teaching Marcus how to tie his shoes in a park where no one knew his name. I sat down next to him on the rug. "You okay, baby?" "Mommy?" he whispered, not looking up. Why did Daddy have 2 houses? Was he hiding from us? That question cut deeper than any insult Diane had thrown at me. I pulled him into my lap, right there on the floor of the $4 billion empire. He wasn't hiding from us, Marcus. He was hiding us, I said, resting my chin on his head. He thought the world out there was too loud and too mean for a love as quiet as ours. He was wrong to do it, but he did it because he thought he was protecting your peace. I realized then that Elias's greatest sin wasn't the affair or the secret. It was the belief that his official life was more valuable than his real one. He spent his life building a castle, but he only ever felt at home in our cottage. I reached into the back of the album and pulled out the very last thing Elias gave me. It wasn't a stock certificate or a deed. It was a video file on a small thumb drive, labeled, "For Marcus when the noise starts." I plugged it into the massive screen on the library wall. Elias's face filled the room. Not the stern, polished man from the portrait, but the man I knew. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "Marcus," the recording began, his voice echoing in the vast room. "If you're watching this, it means the world finally knows you exist. I'm sorry I made you a secret. I was a man who owned everything and possessed nothing until I met your mother. Don't let this money define you. Use it to build the world I was too scared to live in." We sat there for a long time, watching the man we loved finally tell the truth. I didn't care about the shares or the mansion in that moment. I just cared that my son finally heard his father say his name out loud to the world. "Mommy," Marcus said as the screen went black, "can we go back to our kitchen tomorrow? I want to make the pancakes Daddy liked." I kissed his forehead. "We can make them right here, Marcus. This is our kitchen now. and we're never going to be a secret again. 6 months later. If you walked into the Vance Global headquarters today, you wouldn't recognize it. The men in gray suits are still there, but they're not running the show anymore. The boardroom has been moved from the 50th floor to the 2nd, right next to the new community tech center we opened in Elias's name. I'm standing in the lobby, watching a group of kids from my old neighborhood in the South Side walk through those gold-plated doors. They don't look at the floor, they look at the ceiling, and they look at portraits of Marcus that hangs right next to his father's. I'm reading your comments right now, and I see you, Sarah from Philly, asking, what happened to the daughter? Well, she's upstairs. She's the new head of the Vance Scholarship Fund. It turns out, once she got away from her mother's shadow, she actually wanted a brother. She and Marcus are currently arguing over whose turn it is to pick the movie for Friday night. As for Diane, last I heard, she's living in a modest 3-bedroom condo in Florida. She tried to sue me for emotional distress, but it's hard to win a case when your own daughter testifies that you were the one causing the stress. I realize now that my journey wasn't about the $4 billion. It was about the cost of a lie. Elias paid for his silence with his peace, and Diane paid for her status with her soul. I was the only one who didn't have anything to lose because I already had the only thing that mattered, the truth. I'm Elena Thorne. I started as a secret, but I'm ending as the legacy. Hit that like button if you believe the truth always finds a way out. Subscribe to the family because we have a lot more secrets to unmask and a lot more justice to serve. See y'all in the next story. Stay bold, stay honest, and always keep your head up.